Hey, thank you for having me here today to talk about a very challenging problem. That's those people that when you come into your practice and look at your schedule, you see them on that schedule and part of you cringes, and then there's another part that wants to turn around, do an abrupt about face, and run like hell. This is all about identifying those people and turning low outcome patients into outcome success stories. So I want to support you in this. I love collaborating and working with other providers because, in my opinion, it takes a team to help manage and treat this subset of people with chronic pain and coexisting disorders. I'm Dr. Steve Grinstead, and I've been working with this population for a long time, over 3 decades, and it's been an exciting and sometimes daunting journey, and I want to share some of my experience with you today in that area. Now, as you can see, we have a problem, and everybody says it's not about the nail. And I'm going to talk more about this nail as I move forward into my presentation, but just keep that in mind and be thinking about the nail. We do have an overwhelming problem, it's true. Politically and medically, we have a lot of challenge. There's over $500 billion in direct cost for people with chronic pain. And this is more than spent on a lot of other disorders like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. What's really amazing is that the highest utilizing 25% of pain patients consume over 75% of the healthcare dollars, and the highest utilizing 10% in that subset consume 50% of those dollars. You know, there's been a big impact of the opioid crisis on healthcare. You see it all the time. I get news blasts, e-blasts every single day on this. The cost of opioid-related treatment in 4 years went up over 1,000%. They said in 2015, the private payers' average costs for a patient diagnosed with opioid abuse or dependence were more than 550% higher than the standard per patient average cost. And most of this is from the ER visits and the urgent care visits. Now, a lot of these people, when they can't get into their primary care provider or their pain provider, they then do the next best thing. In the middle of the night, on weekends, they go urgent care or emergency rooms, and those are eating up dollars very, very fast. I want to talk about chronic pain in the coexisting disorder zone, because this is what we're talking about with this small percentage of people, maybe 10, maybe as low as 10% and as high as 20% of the population. These are the patients that, despite everything you do for them and everything we do for them, unless we're working concurrently and collaboratively, they don't get better. They stay stuck. When someone has chronic pain, it impacts them biologically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. We recognize that, we know that, we can pretty much tell what's happening for this person when they're living with debilitating levels of chronic pain 24/7 for 6 months or more. What sometimes isn't so apparent is the coexisting disorder zone. This can be things like medication abuse, medication dependence, medication addiction, pseudo-addiction, and it can be also several other coexisting psychological disorders, including personality disorders. I'm going to cover the common ones a little bit later in this presentation, but just keep it in mind. Now we have two different universe of symptoms here. We have this universe of psychological, emotional, addiction symptoms going on, and then we have the chronic pain going on. If the person goes into your clinic and is working with you, they're dealing with 1/3 of the problem. If they go into a mental health provider or an addiction provider that does coexisting disorder treatment, they're dealing with a different third of the problem. But unfortunately, what happens is there's a synergistic effect when this person has both going at the same time, and this is the pain and coexisting disorder zone. And this requires collaborative and concurrent treatment interventions with high levels of communication between all of us, all us team members, including the patient who is the captain of the team. Some of the most common problematic coexisting disorders: medication abuse and addiction disorders. Those are very challenging if you're not set up to treat those. And even when people are treating those, because they have other issues going on, they may not get effective outcomes. This is for that small subset of people again, not everybody. One of the biggest things I've run into is people with moderate to severe unresolved trauma history. It can be from childhood abuse, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. It can be a motor vehicle accident, and the most serious of those is where the person's in an accident and someone in the car with them, especially if it's a loved family member, dies and they survive. This can be tremendous. And then of course we have some of the other, gang violence, we have combat experiences, all these. I consult with a program in San Antonio, Texas, Laurel Ridge, and they have a military resiliency unit where they bring people in off the front lines who have chronic pain, trauma, and substance use problems. And they treat them all concurrently, and they have some pretty good outcomes. Depression is a very common symptom for people living with chronic pain. The depression is just so bad sometimes that people cannot motivate themselves and get motivated, and at some level they become a suicide risk. Then we have people with anxiety disorders. And this makes it very challenging because, especially if it's a social anxiety disorder, when they walk into our offices, they're nervous, they're anxious, they don't know what to do, they don't want to be with other people, they don't want to go join any hydrotherapy groups, any pain support groups, for example. The anxiety is overwhelming and it sabotages their treatment. People with sleep disorders, they get into sleep deprivation, and boy, that impacts them at all levels. Physically, they're drained and wore out. Psychologically, they're not thinking clearly, they're not regulating their emotions effectively. At the social level, they're not interacting with friends, family, and community in a healthy way. And spiritually, they're cut off or shut down from their spiritual power. 5 to 7% of the general population has a personality disorder. I'm sure a lot of you have run into them in your practice. Some of the more common ones are the borderline personality disorder, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, dependent. These are some of the people that make it very challenging, and especially the borderline personality disorder, because they get into a lot of team splitting, staff splitting. And it makes it really hard because one day you're the hero, the next day you're the villain, and vice versa. You have a borderline when staff members are at each other's throats fighting about a patient's care. That's usually the first tip-off. We need to look at this. Then we have cognitive impairment from living with high levels of pain over a long period of time. This impacts their ability to make good decisions, to think clearly, to store memory, and emotionally they're either flooded or cut off, and they tend to overreact or shut down. And then a lot of people start using food to cope instead of for fuel, and they run into problems in this area. And for some pain disorders, an appropriate diet and nutrition plan is crucial for them to get better. Again, remember, I'm talking about this small 10 to 20% of people that you work with and people that I see in my practice that sometimes don't get better because we're not working together collaboratively. So, question that I like to ask people: are we managing pain but fueling the coexisting problems? And let me talk about Richard. Richard is somebody who was in a long-term recovery from opiates and alcohol and was working a really good program, and then he got injured. Now, there's two risks for people in recovery from a substance use disorder when they have an injury or pain problem or medical condition come up. The first is the obvious. they take the wrong thing or too much of the right thing and run into problems, and it triggers their addictive disorder and they go into relapse. For Richard, though, he went the other direction. He had this mindset, and it was reinforced consistently at his meetings, that now that I'm in recovery, I can't take nothing. No matter what, I've got to tough it out. And this is a big problem. Problem number two, are we treating the coexisting but sabotaging the pain management? And this is what happens if we're not communicating freely and collaborating, because mental health or addiction providers can easily sabotage an effective pain management program. You know, let's talk about Susan. Susan was someone who was misdiagnosed with opioid addiction when it was really a pseudo addiction because she wasn't getting her migraine symptoms managed appropriately. Originally, she went to her primary care physician and was put on high doses of hydrocodone for her periodic migraine episodes. And then after time, the episodes came more frequently and they were more severe, and so she got stepped up to a higher level of medication, the Percocet medication. And when that stopped working, the doctor says, well, I'm going to put you on a long acting, and put her on OxyContin with kept the Percocet for the breakthrough. Now, what was happening with her, as many of you know, a lot of migraines can be rebounded by taking opioids. And that's what happened with her. And yet when she went into treatment, she was sent to an addiction program, and when she had a migraine, they accused her of drug seeking and med seeking. So that's what happens for some people. Fortunately, her story had a pleasant outcome. And although it was really close, because after she got out of the treatment program, she attempted suicide. And that's where I ran into her. I was a referral from Heritage Oaks Hospital. It's a psych hospital in Sacramento, and I'm on the referral list. And when I went in and met with her and assessed and everything, got her hooked up with a good interventional pain program, she got effective treatment for her migraine. Her quality of life went way up. So that was the team approach that really made a difference. There's a lot of obstacles that get in our way. The biggest one is failure to recognize or treat the coexisting disorders, because guess what? It is about the nail. You know, the nail are the coexisting disorders. One of the things that also gets impacted is family systems, and so the family needs to be an integral part of a collaborative and concurrent treatment plan, because there's amazing amounts of enabling behaviors and codependency, and unfortunately a lot of families get split up and burnt out and become angry with the pain patient. And then there's us as judgmental healthcare providers. A lot of times people feel like they're not being taken seriously, their pain can't be that bad. They get the impression that we're telling them it's all in your head. Now, in effect, it really is, but let's not go there yet. And then a lot of times with some people, it's the blame the victim mentality. Well, you did it to yourself. And then a lot of people, when they do seek help, like in Susan's case, they get accused of drug seeking or med seeking behavior. Then there's all the patient's self-defeating reactions. A lot of people get really good at manipulative, malicious compliance in order to keep you doing what you're doing. And yet, when you look at their track record, they never seem to get better. Even on high levels of oral medication and periodic interventional procedures, their pain never gets below a 7 or 8 on a 1 to 10. And that's a problem. Now, I'm not talking about all of them, because for 80% or more of the people, they do respond well to the biological approach. It's this small subset that doesn't. And one of the things that makes it more challenging is part of the coexisting is when the person gets into the chronic pain trance. They became hopeless and helpless. They get into a point of believing that nothing's ever going to change, it's never going to get better. A lot of people experience a lot of grief and loss over their prior level of functioning and quality of life, and many of them feel very ashamed and guilty, and some of them guilty about taking medication because they confuse dependence with addiction, and so do their family members. A lot of times you can tell that someone's going the wrong way when their depression keeps getting worse and some of the other coexisting disorders aren't being treated or identified. These people have a tremendous amount of resistance and denial to anything other than the pills, shots, and surgeries. That's all they think is they need. And when you try to intervene and offer anything else, it's like hitting a brick wall. And this leads to power struggles, and nobody wins these. There's a lot of unrealistic expectations. We all have them. It's part of being human. I want to talk about it the extremes. With my addiction colleagues, like with Richard's case, total abstinence is the solution. You know, there's still a lot of treatment programs in the United States that do not condone or believe in medication-assisted addiction treatment. And what we know from the research, that some people will die if they don't get that assistance, and they'll never get it. And we have the solution, but it's getting the word out to people. So that's one. The mental health providers, they are in their own bubble. I've been there with some of my patients. Is let's just get into doing some really deep psychotherapy and trauma resolution work and all that. And if we fail to be collaborating with the pain and with other coexisting disorders, we don't get anywhere either. So this psychotherapy as the solution is at the extreme, and it just doesn't ring out. And then we have pain management providers. The biological approach is the solution. And guess what? For 80% of the people, yes, it is. But for this subset, no, it's not. And then for the poor family members, they just, oh, please, man, I'm sure you've had the calls I have. You have a friend or family member call in and just frantic and says, you've got to help them, man, they're suffering really bad. And it's just a big challenge. That's why in the programs I consult with, in my own program, we have a very strong family component, because they need to be part of the integrated collaborative treatment team. It is a new climate. You know, the old system doesn't work for everyone, and that's that 10 to 20%. So we need a new paradigm. We need something to help this subset of patients. We need a synergistic treatment solution for that synergistic treatment problem. We need concurrent and collaborative treatment. We need to be working together. We've got to get out of any of the turf war stuff, and we've got to be supporting each other and making a difference in these people's lives. One of the biggest things for me, this saying goes back a long ways, that knowledge is power. So educating our patients and our fellow teammates and doing cross-training is really important. But guess what? John Quincy Adams said, a little knowledge that acts is worth infinitely more than much knowledge that is idle. That's why we need to get people to be proactive participants in their own treatment process. We cannot do it all, especially for this subset of people. We need to follow evidence-based, vital best practice treatment. And the political climate and the insurance regulations sometimes sabotage this because they don't authorize appropriate interventions. I believe, and here I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but I believe that we all need to be politically active and advocate. Advocate, advocate. It's our job to be there and stand up for these patients that aren't getting appropriate treatment. Not because of us, but because the system's broke. So we need to keep continuing those med-surgical components, including effective medication management, and for people in recovery from addictive disorder, we need to use recovery-friendly medications. On the psychological area, the emotional and cognitive processes, we need to use cognitive behavioral therapy with a manualized treatment approach. That is what NIDA and SAMHSA say is the best practice standards for addictive disorders. But guess what? I believe it's also good for any of the other coexisting disorders also. And then the most exciting part for me is the non-pharmacological and holistic approaches. For this subset of patients, without these, they're never going to get better. They need to get proactive approaches going in their own life. The good news here is there's virtual no limit to these types of interventions except your imagination and the motivation of your patients. So you guys know all about these. I'm just a babe in the woods here, but I know that I've collaborated with other interventional specialists, and I know how these different procedures have really allowed me to work better with people as well as their functional restoration physical therapist. It gives them some breathing space and they can tend to get better. We need to have safe and effective medication management, and for people in recovery, recovery friendly. And we do have some. You guys know much more about this stuff than I do, but I know enough to know that some of these that are on this slide, which is just a small portion of what's available, are some of the best for some of the patients I've worked with over the years. And with mental health disorders, we're having some new ways of treating this. In the past, it's been heavy going on the benzos, you know, the Xanax, the Ativan. So, but now we're finding there's other things that work really well, like the antidepressants. And the upside for the antidepressants is they also do good pain management. So you get a double whammy here. And for the anxiety, now we're finding instead of the benzodiazepines, how about some high levels of gabapentin or the SSRIs? Or now we're finding high dose duloxetine at high levels, 90 to 120 milligrams, will make an amazing difference for some people. And there's the oldie but the goodie, Buspar, that works really well. And for the bipolar disorders, we're learning more and more all the time. And so these are some of the standard approaches that have really been effective with some of the psychiatrists that I collaborate with. And for attention deficit disorder, too many people are on, you know, some of the old ones that end up having problematic side effects, including addiction, stimulant addiction. This new generation is much safer. It has a lower abuse potential. You can't snort it or shoot it, and it has a longer half-life, and it's really effective for a lot of these people. Now, let's move into these. Here's a list of some of the most standard common non-pharmacological approaches out there. These are all evidence-based, they've proven effective, they make a difference, and the only problem is a lot of people say, oh, I've already tried that. So my question is, have you ever tried these when you weren't on high doses of opioids or benzodiazepines or both? Because they don't work really well if people are too over-medicated. So we need to look at these. Then some of the not so standard that, remember, this is just for that small subset of people. There's a lot of different things we can find. So we need to meet the person where they're at, what their comfort zone is, and we need to give them a palette or a menu to select from. Like when I was consulting with the Lakota Sioux tribe in South Dakota, they came up with 3 primary interventions: tribal healing, sweat lodges, and talking circles that worked for their people. And it made a big difference. Self-help groups can be a blessing or a curse. I try not to send a pain patient who has a substance use disorder to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous right away, because too many people there try to play doctor with them, tell them you're not really in recovery because you're on meds, even if they're appropriate, recovery-friendly medication, even if it's just an antidepressant. So you got to be really careful. That's why since 2006, I've helped different programs start a Chronic Pain Anonymous support group for this population and a Pills Anonymous support group. They are much less judgmental and much easier for the pain patient to go into. The big one, stress. What? Stress? I'm not stressed, are you kidding? And this one hits me all the time. I've noticed, because I've been living with chronic pain over 30 years, and I notice when my stress is up, my pain's up. And guess what? You aren't doing good pain management unless you're also doing stress management. That's the bottom line. I like to use what I call stress thermometer that I developed with my friend and colleague Terry Skorsky. So basically there's 4 zones: the blue, green, yellow, and red. Now, all of them have their place. The blue zone's the relaxation area. You know, when you first wake up in the morning, you're not asleep, you're not awake. That's the relaxed, number 1. Number 2 is when you're starting to come online. You might be out of bed, but you're kind of on autopilot. Level 3, relaxed and focused. I call this vacation mode. My focus is on relaxing here. You can't get a lot done therapeutically, cognitive behaviorally at this level. Then we move into the go zone, the functional levels of stress. And what happens at level 4, we start to come online, we get focused and active, we're getting things done, and then at level 5, now we're happening, we're free flowing with no effort. When we hit level 6, now it's starting to take a little effort. You ever have those days you're getting things done but you're pushing really hard? For the pain patients, the danger zone starts at level 6. Because at level 7, it's not just about psychology, it's about biology. The adaptation response, the stress reaction kicks in, fight, flight, freeze, and the first thing that happens at level 7 is people have an inability to stay focused. They space out, they get spacey. At level 8, if I'm there, I get irritated, agitated, then driven and defensive. And if I hit level 9, I call this the foot and mouth stage. I'm going to say or do something I know I'm going to regret. You ever been there, you've been in a situation and in your head you're saying, please don't do that, don't go there, don't go there, and you go there anyway? That's level 9. Now level 10, for people with a moderate to severe unresolved trauma history, they have a trauma reaction when they hit at level 10. They have a loss of control, cognitive behavioral control at this point. This is where people are at highest risk of self-harm or using substance to self-soothe and self-medicate and start abusing their medications. At 15, they can go into dissociation, and then at level 20, they have a full-blown collapse. So how do we help people that are at these high levels of stress? Well, some very simple to use relaxation methods that many of you in here probably already use. I use the combination of the progressive muscle relaxation, that's the first 2 bullets. Sometimes guided imagery really works to get people soothed. Teaching people to use hypnotic reprogramming, counting backwards from 10 to 1 with the breath. One of the things I found over the years, it's almost impossible to be suffering and in gratitude at the same time. A lot of my patients really resist doing that. When they do, it's great. And then tapping into their spiritual energy. I have a new sideline I've been working on the last year or so, and it's called Spiritual Warrior, Life Without Armor. And I came up with a good worksheet that I'm using with my patients now. It's called Claiming Your Spiritual Power for More Effective Chronic Pain Management. And I use a lot of the self-hypnotic subliminal recovery. I've been using those since 1988. They are very effective. They work very well. And there's even more. Now these are out there for some of you, but now remember, we're not talking for the 80% of the people. We're talking about that subset that we need to put these on the menu and see if they will at least give them an honest trial. And these are some of the things that I have found effective with my pain patients over the years. And it really makes a difference when we can get people utilizing some of these non-medication based approaches, so they're not just depending upon someone else to fix them, they're taking charge of their destiny. Here's one of my favorite relaxation. This is my dog Becca, and she's my little therapy dog. But also, when I have her come in, a lot of my patients consistently ask me, can Becca be at our next session too? They love this little yellow dog, and she really soothes me. So when I'm under a lot of stress, I will want to take her and we'll go to the ocean, we'll go to the river, we'll go for a walk, or maybe just lay down on the floor together, which I really enjoy. The other most important and simple tool that I want to suggest that maybe you have this chart in your office is a visual analog scale with personal descriptions. And it's very effective, it's very accurate, it's very easy to teach our patients. And this is a starting point. So I give my patients this as a starting point, and then I give them 1 through 10 blank, and I said, guess what? Those blanks are your descriptions. How would you describe your pain at each of those levels? This way they become more effective and accurate with communicating with us where their pain's at and how it's impacting their functioning. That's what I want to see. And again, very simple. So the stress thermometer and this visual analog scale with the descriptions are something that are very simple. They can be hanging in your office. They can be on a sheet of paper you hand people. It's a very simple educational tool. And again, managing stress is managing pain. So we want to help people see that. So when they bring their stress down, they will bring their perception of pain down at the same time. We need to be working with the whole person. And you guys take the lion's share here in the biological area, and we also need to depend on like physical therapy, functional restoration, diet and nutrition, appropriate activity pacing plans. Those are all very, very important. In the psychological realm, this is where we need to deal with the person's self-defeating patterns. I call it the inner saboteur. We also need to teach them how to challenge those depression thoughts, for example, or the other ones. Again, this is for that subset of people with the coexisting disorders that never get better despite what you do in the biological area. We need to work collaboratively so we can help this person heal. The social area, this is a most overlooked area for a lot of people. This is where we want to have them find non-paid people to be part of their team, coaches and guides that they don't have to pay, places they can go where people will understand them, they can share their story, they can share their experience, their strength, their hope, their suffering, and they won't be looked at weird. When we put this all together, the spiritual is the glue that holds it all together. So I believe we need to improve levels of functioning at all four domains. In my program, that's something we're doing outcome measures, and this is one of the outcome measures we're tracking, is where they're at coming in, biopsychosocial, spiritually, and then where they're at the end. But we do this periodically through treatment, and we get their scores up. Low outcome patients are the people we're talking about today. A lot of these people are manipulative, they become maliciously compliant and give half-hearted lip service to following your recommendations or my recommendations, and they expect to become pain-free with no personal effort. They have this magical thinking going on. They're not motivated to experiment with some of these other both traditional and non-traditional pain management methods, and they have poor family or social support. These people don't do so well. This is the 10 to 20% of the people I'm talking about today. This is why we need to work together. And we need to get people to becoming high outcome. We need to change the script. We need to change the ending of the story. We need to help them actively engage in their own treatment. Help them let go of that magical thinking and get willing to move forward. They become self-motivated, and they can experiment strategically and actively with both the traditional and non-traditional concurrent pain management modalities, and building healthy, positive social support. That needs to be part of what gets worked on to turn these poor outcome people into high outcome people. I believe they need to be proactive. They need to be active participants in their own healing process. They need to be the captain of their treatment team. It's our job to be their guides and coaches. And together, we need to use a collaborative, non-confrontational, or what I call a positive strength-based approach, and create concurrent and collaborative treatment plans with the patient having input into it, because if they don't have input into developing their plan, they're much less likely to follow it. And the last one, develop recovery and relapse prevention plans. I'm not talking about just addiction here. I'm not talking just about the coexisting disorders here. I'm also talking about pain flare-ups, about pain management, how to develop a plan to predict what's going to happen. This is where proactive activity pacing comes in, identifying your psychological and environmental triggers for pain flare-ups, looking at what causes you to go backwards with treating your depression, let's say, or your trauma. All this needs a plan. And this is the point where I'd like to hear from some of you. Any comments or concerns or questions that you've had as a result of what I'm talking about today? Again, how can we better play well together? How can we team up to resolve this overwhelming synergistic problem by creating a new synergistic solution? And I want to invite you to come by our booth today, later, and talk to me, talk to some of the other teammates. And we really want to make a difference. We want to work with you. We want to make your job easier, and we want you to make our job easier. And together, when we do that, we'll have high outcome people. So thank you for your attention today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk